Good afternoon, friends. It's Mawdiay Faith again with Fearful's Journey Through the Desert. I thought we could pick up on chapter 4 and continue reading. I don't know if we'll get through the rest of it, but we will at least get through a part of it. If you are just joining me, I will leave the links to chapters 1, 2, and 3 down in the comments below so you can catch up and enjoy Fearful's Journey through the desert with us. I hope you enjoy it. Fearful was so scared, and having lost the courage from earlier, she was having trouble obeying the whisper. Her stomach felt like it was one big knot being pulled from 1,000 different directions. How could she trust Prince Anointed One when she was ready to faint and he wasn't even there? The two men tied her wrist in front of her so tightly tears welled up in her eyes. They set her on a horse in front of one of the men before starting out at a fast gallop. Oh, how different this ride was from the one she took yesterday. The strong, loving back was replaced by a cold, grim back that gave no comfort whatsoever. The hours dragged by with nothing but desert around them. When they finally came to gardens with slaves working as hard as they could, only getting up as Prince Iniquity passed by. Every time they passed a garden, Fearful wished the ground would swallow her up. Those long stares and whispers were like 1,000 arrows being shot in her direction. They finally came to the capital city, and people started gathering around them. "Sound the horn for the gardeners to come into the city. I want them all to see what happens to traitors," Prince Iniquity shouted, jumping off his horse. The herald took his place beside the watchkeeper in the tower, lifting the horn to his lips. A low, long blast went out through the fields, calling all the slaves to come in. It only took a few minutes for the gardeners to come in. Fearful was roughly pushed up onto a platform that had a cross set up on it, and stood there for all mocking eyes to see. Tears trickled down Fearful's tanned cheeks and fell onto her dusty feet. "Did I not make myself clear last time that I will not tolerate betrayal? I must not have, because this stupid girl did just that. Mark my word. I warned and I pleaded with her like a compassionate master. But what thanks did I get? A slap in the face. I tell you, for her disrespect, she shall be rightfully punished. The correct punishment is death." With that, someone behind her started whipping her. "Stop!" someone yelled from the crowd. Fearful looked up, and her face lit up with a smile. He had come. He was actually here. He looked like a gardener. He had chopped off his shoulder-length brown curls. He wore the rough potato-sack pants and an extremely realistic mask. His bare chest was streaked with mud. He looked as though he had been whipped. In fact, if it hadn't been for the love in his eyes, she would not have recognized him. But there was no way to disguise that love. He started to peel off the mask as he made his way through the crowd. Once his face was unveiled, a hum of murmuring voices arose from the crowd, and Fearful heard the guards by her side starting to clear their throats uncomfortably. What surprised her most was that out of the corner of her eye she saw Prince Iniquity trembling. Prince Anointed One, you of all people should know that a slave who runs away is worthy of death." Fearful looked up out of the corner of her eye to see Prince Iniquity had fear in his eyes. This was something she had never seen before. "True, but I also know that if someone is willing to take their place, they are vindicated." Prince Anointed One made his way up to the platform. "You want to give your life for this runaway wretch?" Prince Iniquity scoffed. "You know what I see when I look at her?" Prince Anointed One was now on the platform and had both hands on Fearful's shoulders. Her tense shoulders relaxed, and the fear that she had felt all afternoon melted away. "I see a gorgeous princess who is lost and can't find her way home to me. So with that, I can truthfully say I'll take her place, and anyone else who asks me to." An evil grin came onto Prince Iniquity's face. Fearful knew that could not mean anything good. Free the girl if his highness wants to give his life for her. Fearful tensed again at the evil look he gave her, which said, "You're mine now." She looked up into Prince Anointed One's eyes with a question in hers. He took her face in his hands and smiled. "Trust me." She bit her lip uncertainly. How could she be free from Prince Iniquity if Prince Anointed One was dead? She would be watched even closer than before. Yet Prince Anointed One had come after her, asking her to trust him. She hesitantly nodded her head. Fearful ran down the steps of the platform to her father, who must have come with Prince Anointed One. He, too, was disguised as a gardener, but she recognized him by the birthmark on his right hand. She put her arms around his waist. He wrapped his arm around her shoulders. She looked up to see Prince Anointed One kneeling up on the platform. The men were whipping him as hard as they could. After what seemed like hours, but was probably no more than a few minutes, Prince Iniquity held up his hand, signaling the guards to stop. "I think this man ought to have a proper thank you for saving one of my best gardeners." With that, they pulled a robe over Prince Anointed One's head. They jammed a crown of thorns on his head and placed a scepter in his hands. Once they had him in a kingly apparel, they started to mock him. Well-aimed spoiled vegetables, punches, and kicks started flying at him. A cry escaped Fearful's lips as tears ran down her cheeks. How could they be so cruel? What had he done to them? Ambassador of Trust tightened his grip around her, and when she looked up, quiet tears were rolling down his cheeks too. "No! Nail him to the cross!" "No!" Fearful sobbed. A sharp pain squeezed her heart as though a noose was being tightened around it. She buried her face in her father's arm. How would you be feeling right now? Leave the comments in the below, please. Something impelled her to look up. The face she looked into was streaked with blood from the thorns and tears of pain. Yet that sparkle of love in his eyes that she had learned to depend on was sparkling brighter than ever. "I love you," he mouthed as Prince Iniquity's men roughly nailed him to the cross. She couldn't watch any more. She had to leave. She ripped herself away from Ambassador of Trust and pushed her way through the crowd. How could there be a love so strong that it would die for another? She didn't understand. And that is the end of chapter 4. I hope you are enjoying Fearful's journey through the desert with me, and I hope you'll continue to join me for the rest of the story. What do you think will happen? Tell me in the comments below. Bye. God bless.